Well, good morning. And the question for you all is, how's business? Now, seriously, how's business? Well, how honest are you with your colleagues, friends, and family? How easy do you make it for people to help you? Our speaker today believes that we frequently make life harder for ourselves because we ignore the most valuable resource we possess, the relationships that we have built up over time. He was called, and I quote, one of Europe's leading business networking strategists by the iconic Financial Times. And he is the author of 5 books on networking and professional relationships, as well as an international speaker on the topic. I know that's true because I often contact him and he's in some parts of Europe, all over speaking. His most recent book, Just Ask Why Seeking Support is Your Greatest Strength, explores the importance of being vulnerable and being open to support. And today he's going to share some of his key lessons. Well, I'd like you to welcome my friend, international keynote speaker, prolific author, Toya Wilcox fan, and someone whom I admire, trust, and respect and adore, Andy Lopata.
Thank you so much, Susan, and thank you everyone for welcoming me to your group. Such an interesting group of people as well. It's great to hear from you all. Among all the stories that you've shared, I'm sure over the last 2 years, everyone has got their story from the pandemic and the various lockdowns. Obviously, in California, in Texas, in New York, wherever you are in the UK, we've all experienced the pandemic slightly differently, but everyone's got a story. Probably the hardest moment for me was when I had to make a decision no one should ever have to make. And that was whether or not I put my arm around my mother when she was having a panic attack. Just a little bit of background as to how we got there. My father passed away last year in September from Parkinson's, and he'd struggled for a very long time. And my mother was his carer. My sister and I both lived within a mile of my parents, and we would be there to support as much as we could. But then the pandemic came, and that got harder. The government told us, do not go near anyone who might be at risk of COVID. Do not touch them. So we would go over and support when we had to, but we'd keep our distance. I was in business with my dad. The business was named and still is H&A Lopata Limited, Harvey and Andy. We were in business together for over 20 years until he passed away. And my mum joined the business when she retired as a teacher as well, still works with me. One day I got a phone call from my dad's carer on my mum's phone. My dad's carer never called me. And she simply said, you have to come over now. Your mum's having a panic attack. And I rushed over and my mum was just curled up on the sofa, shaking. And I had to make that choice. Of course, I said it's a choice you shouldn't have to make. It was a choice I didn't have to stop over. I went over and put my arm around her, but it felt awkward. It felt painful. It felt like I was putting her at risk by being there to comfort her. Why am I sharing this with you? Well, that was the culmination of a very tough time for us as a family, both in the business and dealing with everything going on with my father. My dad was in his last year. My mum was struggling with caring for him. And the business had a really bad 2019. And I was on the point of taking action. I was turning the business around, but then COVID came along and hit us hard. Our business is based around me speaking, me training. So it's based around live events. And the rug was just pulled from under our feet. All those plans, all the changes I was making, suddenly I had to go back to square one. And everything else is going on. When the lockdowns came, our government stepped forward. And I'm not going to get into politics. I'm not a huge fan of our government in the UK, but I have to give credit where it's due. And things like the furlough scheme, which must have been one of the first in the world, where they paid 80% of the salary for people who companies couldn't afford to keep on, where they were giving grants to business rate paying companies were fantastic, but we didn't qualify for any of them. And then the bounce back loan came along. It was a loan through your bank, underwritten by the government on a low rate of interest, long repayment terms, that was perfect for us because it would allow us to bridge until we could get the business up and running again. And then the response went to my mum, came from the bank, and it simply said, because of something we found out in our inquiries, you don't qualify. As a result, your application has been closed. And that's what induced the panic attack. Now, all the time, all of that was happening, I had to be out there talking to my clients, talking to prospects, talking to my network. And I had to wear the mask we all wear a lot of the time. How are you coping with the pandemic? It's great. How's business? It's fine. Being positive, because that's what we're conditioned to do with everything going on in the background. I said at the beginning, we've all got our stories, but how many of you have covered up those stories? How many people in your families have covered up those stories when you've asked how they are? How many people have been on Zoom calls with you, laughing, joking, sharing jokes like today, but underneath, they're worried about when they get off this call, what they have to face. And we all do it, as I said. We all hide. When people say, how are you? We say, I'm good. How's business? It's great. And this is true all around the world. We Brits are absolute masters of it. Here's a chart that just shows how Brits respond to any question about how things are, how we are, and so forth. Fine, thanks. Fine, thanks. Fine, thanks. Fine, thanks. Fine, thanks. That's how we Brits emote. We say we're fine. Susan mentioned that I wrote a book called Just Ask about seeking support. And it all came because I recognized that this was what I was doing. I'm a member of the Professional Speaking Association. I've just stepped down after 3 years as the president of the Fellows community. So I know some of you are in the NSA in America, our sister organization. Fellows are our equivalent of CSPs. I'm a Hall of Famer as well. I've been in the PSA since 2003. It's my community. We call each other our tribe. We're very close with each other. Some of my best friends have come from that community. A number of years ago, I would say it would be about 2014, we were in another of those stages where the business was really struggling. In fact, we got to within £400 of our overdraft limit. So about $600, I guess, and probably less now. But we got within that close to our overdraft limit of the business. My sister was saying, what's your plan B? What are you going to do next? And I was going to our PSA meetings and people were saying to me, how's business? And how do you think I was responding? It's great. It's fine. And I went to one of these meetings just to the west of London. And there was a speaker there called Stephen Houghton Burnett running a workshop. And in the workshop, he gave us an exercise to work through on our own first with a series of questions. And then he went around the room and he asked how people had answered it. And there were two questions that were very much the same. One was about speaking business and one was about non-speaking business. And the question was, how would you describe that business? And there were 4 options: growing, stable, new, or in decline. And when we got to, everyone had filled out the forms and Stephen was going around the room, we got to those questions and Stephen said, put your hand up if you answered you've got a strong growing business. And people put their hands up. And then he said, put your hands up if you've got a stable business, and people put their hands up. And he said, put your hands up if people have got a new business, and people put their hands up. And he said, put your hand up if your business is in decline. Nobody put their hands up. There were lies in that room. I know there were lies in that room because I was lying. As I've said already, our business was severely struggling at the moment, but that was the moment that made me realize that if I couldn't even open up to this group I call my tribe, me, someone who considers himself to be open and transparent and honest, this group I call my friends, people who understand the conditions and the business and the sector and could support me, if I can't open up to them, who am I going to open up to? And if I can't do it, what's everyone else doing? So I made a commitment to myself at that point. I was going to turn the business around because everyone wants a happy ending. And then when I had done that, I would stand on the stage at the PSA convention and I would implore our whole community to be more open. And that's what I did. I started being more open. I started being more honest. A few weeks later, I was in a private members club in London, and I bumped into a friend, a fellow speaker called Derry Llewellyn Davis. And Derry said, hi, Andy, how are you? I'm good. How's business? It's great. And then I stopped. I said, no, actually, it's not. We're really struggling at the moment. And Derry's whole demeanor changed. And he said, really, look, I want to know how I can help. Let's sit down. Tell me more. I got 2 referrals from Derry in the next 2 or 3 weeks. I had never got a referral from him before. And I asked him about this quite a while later. And he said, I never thought you needed help. He said, I always thought you were so successful, it never occurred to me to refer you. I did go ahead and I did turn the business around, and I did speak at that convention in 2016. Derek Arden was chairman of the PSA, I think, at the time. And the speaker before me was a guy called Peter Roper. Now, I'm very good friends with Peter. We wrote a book together that was an Amazon.co.uk #2, not category #2, overall #2 on Amazon.co.uk. This was one of the first Amazon plans in the UK, before the internet, before social media. And we got the book on launch. We sold 2,000 copies in the first 48 hours. We went through that together. Peter's daughter is my PA now, very close. He told the story in his talk before mine about going bankrupt, about his business struggling, about not having enough food in his fridge to feed his kids. And all of that happened while we were writing our book together and while we were celebrating its success. But he never told me. It was much later, fortunately before the talk, but it was much later that I found out what Peter had gone through. Because we don't tell people when we're struggling, we keep it to ourselves. And that's something that's got to change, whether it's you, whether it's the people around you and you encouraging them to open up. We've got to have a sea change of attitude. And that starts from understanding why people don't share, why people aren't honest, why people aren't transparent. I mentioned Stephen Houghton Burnett a few minutes ago. He's the speaker who ran the workshop where everything sort of dropped in front of me and I realized what I was doing. Stephen made a lot of money from selling out a tech business a number of years ago. I think he sold out for something in 8 or 9 figures, certainly 8 figures. Shortly before the convention that I spoke at, he wrote a blog on LinkedIn that had a huge impact. And the blog is called Broke, Not Broken. And I just want to share a couple of extracts from it for you, just to paint the picture of what we're all doing. It's called Broke, Not Broken. It says, I've decided I'm going to fess up. I'm going to confess. The time has come and I can't put it off any longer. I have a dark secret. I've been harboring it for a while now, and it's doing me a lot of harm psychologically. I'm broke. There, I've said it out loud and in public. He goes on to say, we're at the point where I can't ignore it any longer. And to be honest, keeping up the facade, which involves continually misleading our friends, is making me sick inside. He goes on, I'm broke, but I want to say I'm sorry. What I am sorry for is letting my ego get in the way of me being able to be honest with many of the people I know, people I love and who love me. I understand that I may well have destroyed trust with some of them. And towards the end, he says, I succumbed to a perverse form of self-imposed peer pressure. Like I said, my ego got in the way. If you take nothing else away from this article, he says, please do take away that the price to your self-esteem, energy, and relationships to keep your ego intact isn't a price worth taking. Stephen kept it all bottled up. I kept it all bottled up. We all do that. I think the landscape is changing. We're seeing massive improvement. The type of presentation I'm giving to you now is something that wouldn't come as a surprise in the way it might have done 10 years ago. Brené Brown probably started the trend with her TED Talks and her books on vulnerability. And we've seen celebrities on both sides of the pond and beyond be open and share what their challenges have been, what's holding them back, what their doubts are, where they felt suicidal. And they've been led by Prince William and Prince Harry. I don't know if I'm still allowed to call him Prince Harry, but I'll carry on with that. But around the time when I first expanded this topic to my commercial clients, Prince William and Prince Harry were interviewed by a magazine for a men's mental health charity that they support. And one of the things that the Duke of Cambridge said was, for too long, there's been a taboo about talking about some important issues. If you were anxious, it was because you were weak. If you couldn't cope with whatever life threw at you, it's because you were failing. Successful, strong people don't suffer like that, do they? But of course, we all do. It's just that few of us speak about it. Why don't we talk about it? Why don't we open up? I think there's three key reasons. Number one, and Stephen talked about this in his blog, is we want to be seen as strong. We don't want to be seen as weak, and we equate vulnerability with weakness. Vulnerability isn't a weakness. Vulnerability is a strength. It takes courage to say, I don't know. It takes courage to say, I'm struggling. It takes courage to say, I don't have all of the answers. And if you get the support that you need, you achieve whatever objective it is so much more easily. That makes you stronger. So we have to reframe vulnerability as a weakness to see vulnerability as a strength. Secondly, we don't want to be a burden to other people. Well, everyone I know gets pleasure from helping people around them, people they trust and who trust them. So maybe it's a selfish act not to ask for help when you're asking people that would get pleasure from helping and supporting you. Maybe we have to change it around and recognize that we're getting the pleasure of helping others, but we're denying them the pleasure of helping us, and stop seeing it as a burden. And third, we assume people can't or don't want to help us. Not our job to make assumptions like that. Let's leave it to them. What is important to do is to be really clear, both to the other party and to ourselves, that it's okay to say no. Let them know that a refusal won't offend, and let yourself know that a refusal isn't designed as a rejection, and stop putting the two together. There are many reasons why people might not be able to help you, but if you're asking the right people and you're making it easy for them to help you, then you're probably not at the top of that list. It may be they're too busy. It may be that actually they don't think they're able to help you for one reason or another. It may be a conflict of interest. It may be a number of things. But if you think it's just about you, you need to get beyond that and be able to understand that it's okay. And in fact, I have a good friend of mine, another speaker, who has really embraced this topic. He's been a big champion and advocate for Just Ask. And I needed to have a sounding board yesterday for something I was working on related to this topic. And I picked up the phone and I said, listen, can I just run through something with you for 20 minutes? And he was in the car driving from seeing his dad. And we went through it. And he said, look, Andy, I'm really struggling because I'm driving, I'm missing my turnings, I'm tired because I've been listening to my dad for the last hour. And I can't give you the attention. And I said, fine, let's stop. And I said, by the way, you can always say no to me. And he said, I know that. And it's just communicating really clearly and making it easy for people to say no without feeling bad. We can get beyond that stage of assumptions. So whether it's you, whether it's your family, whether it's your colleagues, whether it's your friends, we need to create an environment where it's okay to seek support and ask for help. I know that your last speaker was talking about creating a stronger future, and part of that was finding the right people around you who could help you in whatever you wanted to achieve. It's important to know who those people are and know what the environment we're looking to create will be. We need people whose integrity we trust. We need people whose discretion we can trust, and we need people whose judgment we can trust. And those can be people who are in a formal supportive relationship, whether it's a mentor, and I'm sure many of you are mentors, and many of you either have or have had mentors in the past, whether it's a mastermind group, and I know many of you will be in mastermind groups, or even an environment like the Golden Gate Breakfast Club, where you clearly have a very strong bond between the group. It's finding the people around you that you know that you can turn to and you can seek that support from. And when you do that, we need to look for three things. And we need this from the people that we're sharing with, and they need it from us as well. Number one, authenticity and integrity. Integrity, I mentioned in terms of the qualities in the people you're looking to. They need to see integrity from you as well. It's not about looking great to everyone else. It's not pretending we're top of the tree. It's about opening up and really letting people see what the problem is and get to the heart of it. Trust, reliability, and reciprocity. I think the first two speak for themselves. Reciprocity is really important to stress because it's not about, I've scratched your back, now you scratch mine. It's about knowing that other people would help you and them knowing you would help them. Because there's no equity of the moment we need support. It's just knowing we have people we trust and we can turn to, and they will be happy to support us. And sometimes it's just a question of paying it forward. And the person that you've helped, you know they'll go on to help someone else. And then commitment and accountability, particularly in those formal settings, but in any setting, feedback. Let people know that you're following up, or if it's not the advice for you, let them know that you respect it, but why you're taking a different route, and let people know when their advice has really worked out, because that's where they get the enjoyment. But if we can create a culture built on that, then everyone can feel happier and more comfortable about turning around and asking for help. I said at the beginning that everyone likes a happy ending, and the good news is we did get that bounce back loan. It turned out that the reason the bank had declined it, and by the way, they wouldn't tell us why they declined it. I had to turn around and ask my network for help. And fortunately, that bank used to be a client of mine, and I have very high level contacts in it. Turned out that an external credit agency had put a fraud mark, a black mark on our account, and a whole portfolio of other accounts for no discernible reason. We didn't know about it. The bank didn't know about it until they dug into it. And the really positive spin, if you like, the positive point outcome of the story that made me feel great was not just that we got the bounce back loan that we needed to bridge the business, but that others will have done as well, because they removed all of the black marks from that portfolio. And the other good news is that the business turned around. We had a terrible first quarter of the pandemic. We turned over less in that first quarter than we need to turn over in a month. But the next 3 quarters, if I looked at 9 months of the year as one, was probably a record 3 quarters for us. As my clients started realizing that they didn't know how to build relationships with their clients and their prospects when they couldn't see them face to face. So we turned the business around, and we've had a good year to date so far as well. I want to finish though, although I said everyone likes a happy ending, I do need to finish with a bit of a dose of reality. Stephen Houghton Burnett wrote that blog that I shared with you, Broke But Not Broken. And it was a few months before that conference, the PSA conference at which I spoke. So I asked Stephen if I could quote from it, as I have with you today. And he said to me, the response to his blog was like being at his own funeral. He said to me, you know, when you go to a funeral and everyone shares their memories and their feelings about the person who's deceased. He said, I've had that while I'm still alive, because so many people have reached out to me to tell me what I've done for them, what I mean to them, how they view me. And it's been amazing. One of my friends, another fellow speaker, didn't get that opportunity. I was at his memorial service after he passed away suddenly. And like all of these services, people stood up and they shared their memories. Every one of them positive, but interestingly, everyone saying pretty much the same thing. They said what a generous person he was. They said how much of his time he gave. Someone flew in from Africa for the funeral, and said that he had flown to Africa at his own expense for 2 weeks to help her set up a charity there. Someone flew in from the States. And his words were particularly pertinent to me because he said, I still don't know what Richard did for a living, because every time we sat down to talk, he only wanted to talk about me and he never talked about himself. His passing was shrouded in mystery until the day after the memorial service, when my worst suspicions were confirmed. And it turned out he'd taken his own life. And he'd taken his own life because of financial problems. There was so much wealth in that room, and there was so much love for Richard in that room, but nobody knew. I've spoken to his widow about using his story in the book and in talks, and she said she didn't even know the extent of it. She was totally shocked when she found out what had been going on. He was only interested in other people, but he couldn't talk about himself and he couldn't ask for help. When we don't ask for help, we don't just hurt ourselves, we hurt the people who care for us. We hurt the people around us. The support you need is all around you. It's in this breakfast club. It's amongst your family. It's amongst your friends. It's amongst your wider network. And you're there for everyone else. But we all just need to be conscious of that, to be confident of reaching out, to turn around to seek the support, and to just ask. Thank you very much.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Andy. Join me in a round of applause. That was so important, so poignant, so candidly and lovingly said to us. So thank you. It brought back lots of memories. I just recently had a very good friend who did the same thing for the same reason. And thank you for doing that. And I'm going to turn that back to you, Craig.
Oh, thanks, Susan. Appreciate that. Yeah, lots of thoughts. If I can make one comment, I was thinking, Andy, you know, this is a fantastic presentation for the Breakfast Club. Well, for any group, really, for that matter. So thank you. And why is it so effective? And I was thinking, you know, well, Andy's a professional speaker, but in this instance, I didn't feel like a lot of times when a presentation's given to us, it's already been pre-planned and there's kind of a beginning, middle, and an end. But this was a very personal presentation. And I think that really, it just actually elevated your presentation because of the points that you made. So my hat's off to you. Thank you for sharing your personal experience with us, because that was fantastic. And I'm glad that it sounds like there's been a happy ending, you know, to your story naturally, but it must have been so hard during that period of time, I have to say. So yeah, thank you. And I think you made a real good point. I mean, you know, even little things like just accepting gratitude when people show it to you, you know, and giving them the ability to offer that, and being able to accept that. I think that's, you know, that's like such a great life gift. It's more about giving back to them in a way, even though they're giving you something. You know, so maybe you can talk about that, and then we can also take some questions too. So if you wouldn't mind responding, and then anybody that would like to speak, you know, just go ahead and raise your hand.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've picked up a really important point, because it's this thing about, I don't want to ask because I'm a burden if I do so. There are people, and I count myself as one, who probably get more pleasure from helping someone else and knowing how it's landed, how it's impacted, than I do from getting help. And maybe that's part of the problem, I don't know. But we get so much pleasure from it. There's two sides to it, and it all comes down to communication. One is to make it easy for people to help you, and so it's not look, a classic referral request, because referrals come under this as much as anything else. I need to talk to anyone who, you know, might use my services, might need a speaker. I always say anyone gets you no one, and you're painting a crowd scene rather than a portrait. And people can't respond to that because they don't know where to turn. If they see the image of someone in their mind, they can think of them, they can respond. And it's the same with any request for help. Really paint a really clear picture of the help you need, and tailor it to that individual, and they'll be able to support you. Then the other side is not just forgetting about them. So I've gone back to people 5 years after they've helped me and said, you remember you helped me with that? This has just happened. Keep giving the gift of appreciation, not just once, but time and time and time again, because that you're always, whatever else it will achieve, you are just elevating people in their life. You're giving them a boost in the day. So that's a great gift you can give to anyone.
I think Patricia, you're up next, and then Claudette.
Well, Andy, that was absolutely spectacular, meaningful, wonderful, really incredible. And of course, the speaking industry has not been that great in America either. Fortunately, many of us are consultants and coaches as well. What do you see in the speaking training world in England and Europe from this point on?
In terms of the industry, the state of the industry, or in terms of the topic of vulnerability?
Well, why don't you handle it both ways?
I think the state of the industry, I have seen people leave the industry, sadly, because they've turned to other professions, or they just can't make it work, including some of the best speakers I know in the UK. And it's very sad. But, one became a teacher and she's loving it. One who actually did have the business, but she just got a great opportunity in front of her, is loving that as well. But actually, not as many people left the PSA, to my knowledge, that I was worried about. I don't run the foundation, so I'm not privy to all of the confidential conversations, but the conversations I've had, many people seem to have gone through the same journey as me. Huge slump at the beginning of the pandemic, but you can't turn to a client and say, book me for an event. They don't know what's happening in their own team, in their own world, with their own job. We had to wait a quarter for that to settle. And then it started to rise. What we're now seeing, I've just done my first couple of live gigs, but I've also just had a tour of the West Country, four talks in 2 days, cancelled because half of the delegates have withdrawn because of a fear of a fourth wave. So I think we're going to go back into more online now. I think the surge in live won't last much longer. In terms of the vulnerability, when I delivered that talk, it was 5 years ago. It's 2016. I've delivered it to a number of other national conventions since. It always gets a great response. The response in the PSA was phenomenal. I had a member in the Northwest email his whole region and say, because of Andy's talk, I need to share this with you. And he sent it on to me as well. And that wasn't isolated. It's 5 years ago. I think as a community, there's more awareness of this because there is in the general public. But we still fall back into the same old avatar of I'm perfect, I'm wonderful, look at me up on the stage. We've got to accept this is a safe space. Park your ego. When I've closed that talk, and I nearly thought about doing that today because I know a number of you, Tricia, I know obviously you're very highly thought of in the PSA as well as NSA, Susan as well, and I know a number of others of you are well-known speakers. I thought of using the same line, I'll be honest. And I finished the talk by saying, I know that whenever you speak at a speakers convention, you're always worried about what the audience thinks because everyone in that audience is thinking, why is that bugger up there on stage and not me? And I said, today I don't care, because I don't care what you think of me. If one of you listens and acts on this, that's what matters. Now, I lied to a degree, of course I cared, but the message is important there. And I think that we have to keep re-emphasizing it. We can't just do it once and then forget about it.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks, Andy. Claudette, you're next.
Excellent speech. Great content. I can't say enough about that. I do want to share something, and maybe you can also use it. It's a little different perspective. People, myself and others, who work with helping to understand how the brain can help you are familiar with a phrase called name it to tame it. And that means that the minute that you mention you're vulnerable, that you have a problem, you don't honestly feel as bad as you did before. Sharing it actually does tame it.
Mm.
If I'm afraid to speak and I stand up there and I say, wow, you're a big crowd, I'm really nervous, all of a sudden I'm not as nervous as I was before. And it's a phrase people are familiar with. I hope you can also include it. It's an extra benefit to the ones that you're talking about, because once they name it to tame it, it's a little bit more tameable.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you for that, Claudette.
Anyone else?
I think Betty's got her hand raised
Okay.
and a few hands waving as well.
Yeah, lots of people, actually.
Andy, thank you for an amazing presentation in all regards. Some of the comments have already been made. The word vulnerability was the first thing that came up when you started. And first of all, the fact that we as this group are even talking about this is just so important. And I thank you for bringing it up and sharing your personal story. I belong to a group of realtors across the country. We're called the 6 a.m.ers. We meet, we have interviews, blah, blah, at 6 a.m. in the morning, and we share. The purpose of our group is similar to what you're talking about. We share we're vulnerable. We help each other. The purpose is to be healthy, selfish. We have to take care of ourselves and talk about being vulnerable and so forth in order for us to then be there for our clients. And it's amazing. People just share so much in the chat, and we're just there for each other, and we don't even know each other. We've never met. It's all on Zoom. So I think the most important thing is being able to listen. What you talk about, I love what you just said, name it to tame it. If you have something that's going on, if I have something that's going on with my son or whatever, and I share it, it just deflates. It just helps so much. And I think the important thing is that it's not for somebody, not that I'm dumping on somebody, but instead they listen. They don't have to solve the problem. It's just getting it off your chest. And one of the things we listened to is Renee Brown. I'd never heard of her before. She is phenomenal. So I thank you for bringing this forward, talking about vulnerability and how people, how are you? I'm great. No, they're not. You're absolutely correct. And maybe we can have you on the 6 a.m.ers.
Love to. And thank you, Betty. Can I just pick up on a couple of things?
Please.
There? One is encouraging people to open up. You talked about listening, and that starts with encouraging people to open up. And I interviewed for the book Susan and my mutual friend Ivan Meisner, who some of you may know, founder of BNI. Patricia knows him as well. And Ivan introduced me to the concept of semantic differential questioning. And semantic differential questioning is basically asking the same question 3 ways to elicit an answer. And I found myself using this so effectively, almost subconsciously, as soon as he shared it in our interview. So it's like, how are you? Or, how are you? I'm fine. How are you coping with the pandemic and lockdowns? Yeah, it's okay. Well, how has it impacted you? And I think what you're doing is because I make the joke to a degree about how are you? I'm okay. You know what? 90% of the time, that's the right answer. When I came on this call, I said, how are you all? When Patricia came on the call, what did I say? How are you? You don't go, well, you know what? It is an icebreaker and a courtesy. And what we have to signal is actually we're not meaning it like that. And I think that semantic differential questioning helps with that. And the other thing is you talked about, you don't really know each other on the 6 a.m. club. I did have one premise that I wanted to prove with the book that I couldn't. And that was that we find it sometimes easier to open up to strangers than we do.
Oh, that's true.
To our friends and family. Susan said that's true. I agree. I didn't find that in my interviews, really interestingly. I had my translator, I interviewed my translator, a very bright woman from Irkutsk in Siberia, the Paris of Siberia, who I've stayed in touch with since I spoke there. And because I wanted to look at different cultures, different parts of the world. And she talked about how in Russia, you've got these train journeys that go on for days. And you will sit next to someone and you'll tell them your whole life story because you know you'll never see them again. But she was actually the only person other than a Chicago-based counselor who said that's what counselors are for, who said, yeah, I would be comfortable sharing with a stranger. So that's still a grey area for me, because I'm like Susan. I think I don't believe everyone I interviewed, but I couldn't prove my supposition in the book. It's an interesting one. And just quickly on listening, have a look at my LinkedIn from yesterday, a post on my LinkedIn timeline yesterday. My podcast, the Connected Leadership podcast this week, I published a short extract from it where I asked my guest, Mark Hirschberg, about how to listen. And his answer is brilliant, really worth listening. It's about 2 minutes of clip, but just really, really good answer.
And I was on Connected Leadership with another friend who also is on this topic, Grant LaBeouf. And Grant and I have since become friends and stayed in touch because we were introduced by someone we both adore. So I think that happens. But I'm going to tell you, I'm sorry you couldn't prove it. We tell strangers a lot of stuff. In fact, people say, well, that's what they tell counselors. No, that's what they tell hairdressers and barbers. And Patricia knows that. But I sat on a flight from Paris with a guy right from here, and he told me 10 hours of stuff that I should never have known. And when I followed up with him, the interesting thing, he couldn't be in touch with me. And the reason was he told me too much.
Yeah.
And I thought that was, and we had another connection because of his father in Detroit writing a restaurant thing for one of the newspapers. But you know what? We do open up. That's why we tell our cleaners, someone that's not in the way of our emotional. So Andy, I wish you had proven it, but let's you and I try to prove that and dig up dirt on everyone.
That's one way to approach it.
So Bill Buchanan had his head up, and then Antonio White. Did Bill leave? All right, Antonio.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Andy and Susan, for this incredible connection here. What a wonderful topic.
Mm-hmm.
Andy, it's a pleasure hearing your presentation, and I want to just also agree with the group of being vulnerable is so vital, and it's. I talk about this in my book about being emotional, connecting through emotion, and being vulnerable is about as emotional as you can get with folks. And through doing that, be able to get them to engage more effectively in what you're trying to do. And so the trouble is that in my project here, I help people with their elevator pitch, essentially. And in my book, I talk about the preface is that the pitch that you sell yourself on. And the idea is, are you somebody who can be open and sharing with other people, or are you somebody who's putting on a facade of some sort? And what is the easiest way to get the action that you're trying to get? And if you're not asking for help, then for whatever reason, you're not working through your own process, your own work process to solve your troubles. Because if the most immediate expeditious way to solve your trouble is to say, hey, Craig, I could use a hand for this, or hey Andy, I could use a hand with this. If you're not able for some reason to make that connection, then it's not the most efficient way. Being vulnerable, asking for help is the most efficient way to get things done. So in a world that's focused on productivity, right? The idea of not asking for help, the idea of not being vulnerable here is a detriment to being productive, right? Because if we can get to where we need to be faster through asking, through being vulnerable here, then that is a net gain for everybody. So thank you for your presentation, and I just appreciate you so very much.
Thank you very much. And that goes to that whole vulnerability as a strength argument completely. The extension of this in the work that I'm doing, where I'm taking it next, is vulnerable leadership. Because I think there's still a leadership culture, and I listened to what senior leaders of Goldman Sachs and other banks talked about how we cope with the lockdowns and the pandemic and working remotely, and there was no vulnerability in there. It was pure Michael Douglas in Wall Street, And I think that has to shift. So that's where I want to go. Leaders have got to get the message that you can achieve more by being vulnerable. You get more engagement from your team if you tell them, I don't know. Your job as a leader is to gather the information and make the final decision, not make the initial decision and say, that's it, we're sticking with it. And it's little things like that.
Yeah, I just to follow up on that, the two things here are often we get punished for telling the truth on situations here, and to the degree that we're vulnerable or worried about getting punished for that vulnerability, that's one thing. But then the other thing is that if you can't be vulnerable, think about all the negative economic impact from so many people not being vulnerable and open about reality, what's going on in the economy, in politics, in all these other areas here where people are shut off to hold on to power, to do whatever it is, and end up losing it as a result.
Well, actually, one of the chapters in the book is, do we allow our politicians to be vulnerable? And I interviewed the former chairman of the Conservative Party in the UK and the former leader of the Lib Dems. And I got some amazing stories about how they're just not allowed to by the electorate. And to me, it's a huge indictment on our political system. Margaret Thatcher said, you turn if you want to, the lady is not for turning. And in that one phrase, she did so much damage to the political system in this country because she created an environment where people got slaughtered for doing a U-turn, where in fact they should be applauded if they can back up why they've done it.
Any final questions for Andy? Hey, Janice, why don't you wrap it up?
I was just going to say, there's another side to being so vulnerable. I hate to tell you this, but my sister-in-law comes over here every darn week, and whatever's going on in her life, no matter what it is, woe is me, poor me, oh my God, they abused me. And it really gets exhausting because she's so vulnerable and it's so superficial and so self-centered that it gets exhausting. So I just want to throw that in. One day, my son, who everyone in this group has learned from and I've talked about a million times, one day he said, let's all go around the table and everybody tell the best thing that happened this week. And I think she was so thrown. She had to think of something positive. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that into the mix.
No, I think it's a very valid point indeed. And at the end, I'll share a resource that you can share with her because it's a support scorecard and you can work out where you can shift. And actually it says, how often do you ask for help? And you get scored down if you ask too much. Do you have the story? We have the children's story in the UK, the boy who cried wolf.
Oh yeah.
Do you have?
Oh yeah, I talk about it a lot.
Yeah. So that's what that's the story, that's the fable that goes with it. You know, you say you don't know so much, or you say I'm struggling so much. You also help that people switch off, and it's about being thoughtful in the way that you approach this and who you approach and when. You know, I've got 2 mastermind groups, 2 accountability groups, including one with NSA colleagues, and I've got a mentor, and I've got a network of people I trust. So I don't always go to the same people with the same things or even different things. I'm thoughtful about how I approach it.
And go ahead, Chloe.
I just want to say there's a difference in motivation. If I am being vulnerable because I need help and I recognize that I don't have all the answers, that's one thing. If I'm being open about all the problems in my life because I just want to vent and be a victim, that's not the same thing as our speaker has been talking about. Our speaker is talking about a strength that comes from reaching out. If you're just talking about everything that's going wrong in your life, you're not reaching out, you're just giving them a dialogue.
It's
So
not
there is
called just
possibly something
kvetch.
deeper.
Who said it? Who said that word? Yeah.
It's free.
Good freak said kvetch. That's what your sister-in-law is. That means complain. The other thing is, as I listen to you talk, I know people like that, and I'm thinking, now that's a person that needs a full-time live-in counselor. And there
You wouldn't want to live with them.
He needs a full-time live-in anything.
All right, guys. Well, it's 8:54
Patricia's-
right now. So why don't we go ahead and we'll end the recording in just a moment. But before we do, Janice, who do we have next week? I don't have my calendar in front of me.
Next week, I'm very, very excited. My dear friend who I've known since birth is Anna Chouteau. She's on the City
nice.
Council of St. Helena, and she's running for the County Council of Napa, representing, I guess there's two halves of Napa. She's representing, I think, the top half. Anyway, her father, Rene Chouteau, was a city attorney in San Francisco for many years, and then he decided to move up north, and he became a Superior Court judge in Santa Rosa. So she comes from a very fine family. Like I said, I've known them since the 70s. Her uncle was and is one of my best friends, and was a roommate way back in the 70s. So I'm very, very excited to have her come and present stories from the campaign trail.
This is going to be great. I
Okay.
can hardly wait. Well,
can I just, sorry, Craig, before
no,
I go, can I just share, because I mentioned I'll give you that resource. So can I just share that with you? So you'll see a couple of links on the screen. It's the top one, justask.scoreapp.com. If you go to that, it takes 2 minutes, and it's 15 questions, and you get scores on different areas of how you are in terms of asking for help, so reflection and proactivity and so forth. And that's something you can share with people like Janice's sister who you feel might need some support like that. I can send these links to Antonio as well to circulate if that's useful.
no, this is fantastic. Yeah, we can send that out to our group in the follow-up email. So again,
Awesome.
thanks, Andy. Once again, fantastic presentation.